The fluorescent lights in Attorney Rebecca Martinez's office cast harsh shadows across the mahogany desk as 23-year-old Diane Craft rolled up her sleeves for the third time that morning. The purple and yellow bruises on her forearms told a story her mother had refused to hear just 48 hours earlier. "Show me again," Rebecca said gently, her pen poised over a legal pad. Diane's hands trembled as she revealed the finger-shaped marks around her wrists, the dark bruising along her ribs where her shirt had hidden them. "My mom looked right at these and told me to quit being dramatic. She said I was making a mountain out of a molehill." Rebecca's expression hardened. "Your mother's reaction doesn't change what happened to you, Diane. These photographs will speak louder than her dismissal ever could." What Diane didn't know was that this moment, sitting in a lawyer's office, finally being believed, would be the first domino in a chain of events that would shatter everything she thought she knew about family, loyalty, and her own worth.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Diane Craft had always been the peacekeeper. Growing up in the sprawling suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona, she learned early that keeping everyone happy meant keeping herself small. Her childhood home on Saguaro Lane looked picture-perfect from the outside. Terracotta roof tiles, manicured desert landscaping, and a 3-car garage that housed her stepfather Marcus Webb's prized vintage Mustang collection. Inside, however, was a different story entirely. At 23, Diane still lived at home while working as a veterinary assistant at Desert Paws Animal Hospital. She'd graduated from Arizona State University the previous year with a degree in biology, but student loans and the pandemic had derailed her plans for veterinary school. Her mother, Linda Webb, had convinced her to stay home just for a year to save money and help with her younger half-brother, 12-year-old Tyler. "It's practical," Linda had said, stirring her morning coffee with mechanical precision. "Why throw money away on rent when you have a perfectly good room here?" What Linda didn't mention, what she never mentioned, was how Marcus's behavior had been escalating since his construction business started struggling. The man who'd charmed his way into their lives when Diane was 14 had gradually revealed a darker side, one that emerged more frequently with each passing month. It started small. Marcus would playfully grab Diane's arm when she walked past, his grip just tight enough to leave marks that faded by morning. He'd corner her in the kitchen, standing too close while she made lunch for work, his breath hot against her neck as he reached around her for a coffee mug. When she tried to tell her mother about these incidents, Linda would wave her off. "Marcus is just affectionate," Linda would say, not looking up from her phone. "You're reading too much into it." The Tuesday morning that changed everything started like any other. Diane was running late for work, rushing to grab her veterinary scrubs from the laundry room when Marcus appeared in the doorway. He'd been drinking again. She could smell the stale beer on his clothes from the night before. "Where's the fire, princess?" he asked, blocking her path with his broad frame. "I'm running late for work, Marcus. Can you please move?" Diane kept her voice steady, though her heart was already racing. Instead of stepping aside, Marcus moved closer. "You know, you've gotten real mouthy lately, living under my roof, eating my food, and you can't even show me a little respect?" "I pay rent," Diane said quietly, "and I buy my own groceries." That's when his hand shot out, gripping her wrist with enough force to make her gasp. His other hand pressed against the wall beside her, trapping her in the narrow laundry room. "You think that covers what you cost me? The electricity, the water, the space you take up? Maybe it's time you showed some real gratitude." Diane's training as a veterinary assistant had taught her about animal behavior, how to read the signs of aggression, how to stay calm when a frightened animal might lash out. But nothing had prepared her for this moment, trapped in her own home by a man her mother had married. "Marcus, you're hurting me." "Am I?" His voice was mock innocent, but his eyes were cold. "Seems like you bruise awful easy. Maybe you should be more careful."
"Better hurry up," he said, checking his watch. "Wouldn't want to lose that job." Diane waited until she heard his bedroom door close before allowing herself to breathe. Her wrist was already darkening, the pattern of his fingers clearly visible against her pale skin.
She pulled on a long-sleeved scrub top despite the Arizona heat and drove to work with trembling hands. At Desert Paws, she threw herself into her duties, cleaning kennels, assisting Dr. Patterson with procedures, comforting anxious pet owners in the waiting room. But every time she moved wrong, every time she reached for something or lifted a bag of dog food, the bruises on her ribs and wrists reminded her of the morning's encounter. Her coworker, Jamie Torres, noticed first. "Girl, you okay? You seem off today," Jamie said during their lunch break, unwrapping a sandwich in the small staff room. Diane had considered Jamie a friend since starting at the clinic, but she'd never shared the reality of her home life. Jamie was 25, lived in her own apartment downtown, and seemed to have everything figured out. How could Diane explain that she was afraid to be alone in her own house? "Just tired," Diane said, pulling her sleeves down. "Uh-huh." Jamie gave her a knowing look. "Tired or something else? Because I've got eyes, and those look like finger marks on your wrist." The kindness in Jamie's voice nearly broke Diane's carefully maintained composure. She'd become so used to having her concerns dismissed, to being told she was overreacting or being dramatic, that genuine concern felt foreign. "It's complicated," Diane whispered. "Complicated how? Someone putting their hands on you complicated?" Before Diane could respond, Dr. Patterson knocked on the staff room door. "Diane, Mrs. Henderson is here with Duchess for her follow-up. She specifically requested you." The moment passed, but Jamie's words stayed with Diane throughout the afternoon. Someone putting their hands on you. It sounded so simple when Jamie said it, so black and white. But Diane's reality felt painted in shades of gray. Marcus was her mother's husband, the stepfather who'd helped pay for her college textbooks and had taught Tyler how to throw a football. He was also the man who'd cornered her in the laundry room that morning. The drive home felt longer than usual. Diane sat in her aging Honda Civic in the driveway for several minutes, watching the house she'd grown up in. The desert sunset painted everything in warm oranges and pinks, making even the most ordinary things look beautiful. From outside, their life looked normal, even enviable. Inside, Linda was preparing dinner, while Tyler sat at the kitchen counter doing homework. Marcus was nowhere to be seen, probably in his man cave watching sports and drinking beer. "How was work, honey?" Linda asked, not looking up from the stove where she was browning ground beef for tacos. "Fine," Diane said automatically. "Good. Can you set the table? I want to eat before Marcus gets too deep into his evening routine." It was such a normal request, such an ordinary moment, that Diane almost convinced herself the morning had been an anomaly. Maybe she had overreacted. Maybe Marcus had just been in a bad mood and hadn't meant to grip her so hard. But as she reached into the cabinet for plates, her sleeve rode up, revealing the dark bruises on her wrist. Tyler noticed immediately. "Whoa, Diane, what happened to your arm?" Linda turned, her eyes following Tyler's gaze to Diane's exposed wrist. For a moment, Diane thought she saw concern flicker across her mother's face. This was it. The moment Linda would ask the right questions, would finally see what had been happening under her own roof. Instead, Linda's expression shifted to something that looked almost like irritation. "Diane, what did you do to yourself now? You've always been clumsy, but really." "I didn't." "And pull your sleeves down. We're about to eat dinner." The casual dismissal hit Diane like a physical blow. She stared at her mother, searching for any sign that Linda understood the significance of what she was seeing. But Linda had already turned back to the stove, stirring the meat with mechanical precision. That night, lying in her childhood bedroom with its faded purple walls and high school graduation photos, Diane stared at the ceiling and made a decision. She couldn't keep pretending this was normal. She couldn't keep protecting Marcus or her mother or the illusion of their happy family. She pulled out her phone and started researching lawyers in Phoenix who handled domestic violence cases. The blue light from her screen illuminated the bruises on her arms as she scrolled through reviews and testimonials, looking for someone who might believe her story. Someone who wouldn't tell her to quit being dramatic. Someone who would see these bruises for what they really were. Evidence of a crime that had been committed in daylight in a house that was supposed to be safe. At 2:47 a.m., Diane sent an email to Attorney Rebecca Martinez, requesting a consultation. She included photos of her bruises, taken under her bedroom's harsh overhead light, and a brief description of what had happened. She had no way of knowing that this single email would set in motion a chain of events that would expose secrets her family had been hiding for years, challenge everything she believed about loyalty and love, and ultimately force her to choose between the family that had raised her and the person she was meant to become. All she knew was that she couldn't spend another day pretending that fingerprint-shaped bruises were something she had done to herself. The catalyst had been set in motion. There would be no going back. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Rebecca Martinez's law office occupied the 15th floor of a glass tower in downtown Phoenix, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the Valley of the Sun. Diane had never been in a building this tall, and the elevator ride up had made her stomach lurch with more than just altitude. The waiting room was nothing like the cramped veterinary clinic where she worked. Polished marble floors, abstract paintings that probably cost more than her annual salary, and leather furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Diane smoothed her best blouse, a navy blue button-down she'd bought for job interviews, and tried to ignore how out of place she felt. Miss Craft, a woman in her 40s, emerged from an inner office, extending her hand with practiced warmth. Rebecca Martinez was smaller than Diane had expected, but her presence filled the room. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, and her burgundy blazer looked like it had been tailored specifically for her frame. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice," Diane said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your email concerned me. Shall we talk in my office?" Rebecca's office was equally impressive. Law books lined the walls, diplomas from Stanford Law hung behind an enormous desk, and fresh flowers in a crystal vase suggested a level of success that intimidated Diane further. "I should tell you up front," Diane began, settling into the chair across from Rebecca's desk. "I'm not sure I can afford—" "Let's worry about that later. First, I need to understand what's happening to you. The photos you sent were concerning." Diane had practiced this moment in her car during the 30-minute drive downtown, but now that she was here, the words felt stuck in her throat. How do you explain years of escalating behavior? How do you make someone understand that you're not just being dramatic? "My stepfather, Marcus Webb, Diane paused, rolling up her sleeves to reveal the now deepening bruises on her wrists. "This happened 3 days ago, but it's not the first time." Rebecca leaned forward, her expression shifting to something Diane had never seen before, professional concern mixed with genuine anger. "Tell me everything, starting from the beginning." For the next hour, Diane found herself describing incidents she'd never spoken aloud. The way Marcus would accidentally brush up against her in hallways, how he'd started making comments about her body when Linda wasn't around, the increasing frequency of his playful grabbing that left bruises she'd learned to hide. "And your mother?" Rebecca asked, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. "She thinks I'm overreacting. When I showed her these bruises, she told me to quit being dramatic. She said I've always been clumsy and accident-prone." Rebecca set down her pen. "Diane, what you're describing is assault. The physical contact, the escalating behavior, the intimidation, none of this is your fault, and none of it is normal family dynamics." Hearing it stated so plainly should have been validating. Instead, Diane felt a wave of panic wash over her. "But it hasn't gone further than grabbing and cornering me. Maybe I am making it into something bigger than—" "Stop." Rebecca's voice was firm but kind. "Don't minimize what you've experienced. Assault doesn't have to be rape or extreme violence to be real, to be criminal, and to be worth fighting." Diane stared at her hands, at the fading yellow edges of Marcus's fingerprints. "My mom loves him. They've been married for 9 years. He helped raise me, paid for my college textbooks. And Tyler adores him. Marcus is the only father figure he's ever known." "And that complicates things emotionally," Rebecca acknowledged. "But it doesn't change the facts. It doesn't make what he did to you acceptable. What would happen if we moved forward with this?" Rebecca pulled out a folder and spread several documents across her desk. "We have options. We could file for a restraining order, which would require Marcus to stay away from you. We could pursue criminal charges for assault. We could explore both avenues simultaneously. The word criminal hit Diane like cold water. Images flashed through her mind. Police cars in her driveway, Marcus being led away in handcuffs, her mother's face when she realized what Diane had done. Tyler crying, confused about why his stepfather was suddenly gone. "I can't," Diane said, standing abruptly. "I'm sorry. I thought I could do this, but I can't tear my family apart." "Diane, you're not the one tearing anything apart. Marcus made these choices." "You don't understand." Diane was already backing toward the door. "My mom has been through so much. My biological father left when I was 10 years old. She struggled as a single mother for years before she met Marcus. He gave us stability, security. Their house, Tyler's private school, my college education, all of that came from Marcus." Rebecca stood as well, her expression patient but concerned. "And what did it cost you?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Diane felt tears threatening, but she'd cried enough over the past few days. "I need to think about this." "Of course. But Diane..." Rebecca handed her a business card and a pamphlet about domestic violence resources. "Whatever you decide, please stay safe. Keep documenting any incidents, take photos, and call me immediately if he escalates."
The drive home felt like traveling between two different worlds. Downtown Phoenix, with its gleaming office towers and important people making important decisions, faded in her rearview mirror as she navigated back toward the suburbs. By the time she pulled into the driveway on Saguaro Lane, the house looked exactly as it had that morning. Normal, peaceful, unremarkable. Linda was in the kitchen when Diane walked in, organizing coupons at the breakfast bar while a soap opera played on the small television. "Where were you?" Linda asked without looking up. "Jamie called from your work wondering if you were sick." Diane had called in sick that morning, unable to face Dr. Patterson's concerned questions or Jamie's knowing looks. "I had some errands to run downtown." "Downtown? What on earth for?" The lie came easier than Diane expected. "I was looking into some certification programs for veterinary technicians." Linda brightened. "Oh, that's wonderful! It's about time you started thinking seriously about your career. Marcus will be so pleased. He's always saying you have potential if you just apply yourself." The casual mention of Marcus's opinion about her life made Diane's stomach clench. "Where is Marcus?" "At the job site in Scottsdale. That new housing development is finally moving forward." Linda paused her coupon sorting. "He's been working such long hours lately. The stress has been terrible for him." Diane bit back the response that immediately came to mind. Instead, she mumbled something about taking a shower and headed upstairs. In her room, she sat on her bed and stared at Rebecca Martinez's business card. The lawyer's words echoed in her mind. "You're not the one tearing anything apart." But it didn't feel that simple. Diane had spent 13 years in this house, watching her mother bloom under Marcus's attention. Linda had started wearing makeup again when she met Marcus, had begun laughing at sitcoms instead of crying through the evening news. She'd gone back to school for her real estate license, something she'd always wanted but never had the confidence to pursue as a single mother. Marcus had given Linda a life she'd never thought possible. A beautiful home, financial security, a partner who showed up to Tyler's Little League games and school conferences. How could Diane destroy that over some bruises that would heal? Her phone buzzed with a text from Jamie. "Girl, you better not be hiding at home nursing a hangover while I'm dealing with Mrs. Patterson's neurotic chihuahua alone." Despite everything, Diane smiled. Jamie's irreverent humor had been one of the few bright spots in recent weeks. Before she could second-guess herself, she typed back, "Can we talk after work? I need advice about something." Jamie's response was immediate. "Everything okay? Want me to come over?" "No, not here. Maybe we could get coffee tomorrow." "Sure thing. But if someone hurt you, I'm going to hurt them back. Fair warning." Diane stared at the text, surprised by how much Jamie's protectiveness meant to her. When was the last time someone had offered to defend her instead of explaining away her concerns? That evening, at dinner, Marcus was unusually charming. He complimented Linda's cooking, asked Tyler about his day at school, and even inquired about Diane's certification research. "Your mother tells me you're looking into advancing your career. That's smart thinking. Can't work as someone's assistant forever." The comment stung, though Diane couldn't pinpoint exactly why. "Dr. Patterson values my work." "I'm sure he does, but you're bright enough to run your own show eventually, maybe even open your own practice someday." Marcus smiled, and to anyone watching, it would have looked paternal, supportive. Of course, that'll require some real commitment. Can't be running off to lawyers when you should be building your future. Diane's fork clattered against her plate. "What did you say?" Linda looked up sharply. "Is everything all right?" Marcus's expression remained perfectly neutral. "I just said Diane shouldn't let other priorities distract her from career advancement, right, princess?" The endearment that had once seemed harmless now felt loaded with threat. Diane realized with crystal clarity that Marcus knew exactly where she'd been that afternoon. Had he followed her, been watching the house, or had he simply guessed? "I'm not feeling well," Diane said abruptly. "May I be excused?" Linda nodded, already turning her attention back to Marcus, who was launching into a story about the housing development. As if nothing unusual had happened, as if he hadn't just let Diane know that he was aware of her every move. In her room, Diane pulled out Rebecca Martinez's pamphlet about domestic violence. The section on control and intimidation made her hands shake as she recognized pattern after pattern of Marcus's behavior. The isolation from friends and family, the financial control, the way he made her question her own perceptions. But the most chilling section was titled Escalation Warning Signs. One bullet point seemed to jump off the page. Abuser becomes aware that victim is seeking help or planning to leave. Diane closed the pamphlet and slid it under her mattress. Tomorrow, she would meet Jamie for coffee and pretend everything was normal. She would go back to work and assist Dr. Patterson with surgeries and comfort anxious pet owners. She would come home and sit at the dinner table and listen to Marcus's stories about his day. She would not call Rebecca Martinez back. She would not file reports or pursue charges. She would protect her family's stability, her mother's happiness, and Tyler's sense of security, even if it meant sacrificing her own. The decision should have brought relief, but as Diane lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of her family settling in for the night, all she felt was a growing sense of dread. Because deep down, she knew that Marcus's behavior wouldn't just stop. And now that he knew she'd considered fighting back, what would he do next? Outside her window, the Arizona desert stretched endlessly under a blanket of stars, beautiful and vast and utterly indifferent to the small human dramas playing out in houses like hers all across the valley. Diane pulled her covers up to her chin and tried to convince herself she'd made the right choice. But sleep, when it finally came, brought dreams of courtrooms and bruises that never faded, and a voice that sounded remarkably like Rebecca Martinez asking over and over, "What did it cost you?" The coffee shop Jamie had chosen was nothing like the chain stores Diane usually frequented. Copper and Clay occupied a converted warehouse in Roosevelt Row, Phoenix's arts district, with exposed brick walls, mismatched vintage furniture, and the kind of deliberately imperfect aesthetic that made Diane feel simultaneously intrigued and out of place. Jamie was already seated at a corner table when Diane arrived, her curly hair pulled back with what looked like a repurposed bandana, and her usual collection of silver rings catching the afternoon light. She looked up from her laptop and waved Diane over. "This place has the best cold brew in the city," Jamie said, closing her laptop screen. "And more importantly, it's loud enough that we can actually talk without worrying about being overheard." Diane glanced around at the eclectic mix of students, artists, and young professionals scattered throughout the space. Everyone seemed so comfortable in their own skin, so confident in their right to take up space. "How did you find this place?" "My ex brought me here when we were dating. Elena's got great taste in coffee shops, terrible taste in communication." She signaled to the barista.
What do you want? My treat. Jamie, you don't have to. Girl, I make $15 an hour cleaning up after people's pets. I can afford to buy my friend a latte. Jamie's tone was light, but her eyes were serious. Besides, you look like you haven't slept in a week. It was true. The past 4 days since her decision to abandon the legal consultation had been a careful dance of avoidance. Marcus had been on his best behavior, helping Linda with dinner, taking Tyler to his soccer practice, even complimenting Diane on her work with a particularly difficult German shepherd at the clinic. But underneath his pleasant demeanor, Diane sensed a watchfulness, as if he were waiting for her next move. After they'd ordered a lavender honey latte for Diane, black coffee for Jamie, Jamie leaned forward with the directness that had made her such an effective veterinary assistant. Okay, spill, and don't give me some story about being tired from work. I've seen you tired from work, and this isn't it. Diane wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic mug, buying herself time. She'd rehearsed this conversation, but sitting across from Jamie's concerned face made the words feel inadequate. What would you do if someone in your family was hurting you, but confronting them would destroy everything else you cared about? Jamie set down her coffee cup with more force than necessary. I'd confront them anyway. Family doesn't get a free pass to be abusive. But what if it's not that simple? What if that person also provides for everyone else in the family? What if removing them would leave other people you love in a worse situation? Diane, Jamie's voice was gentle but firm. Are we talking about Marcus? The use of his name, spoken aloud in this safe space, made something crack open in Diane's chest. She found herself pulling up her sleeve, revealing the faded yellow remnants of the bruises on her wrist. Jamie's expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, anger, and something that looked like recognition. How long has this been going on? It's been escalating over the past few months. The grabbing, the cornering, the comments when my mom isn't around. Diane's voice was barely above a whisper. I went to see a lawyer on Tuesday. Good. What did she say? That I have options: restraining order, criminal charges. Diane took a shaky breath. I couldn't do it, Jamie. I couldn't be responsible for breaking up my family. Jamie was quiet for a long moment, studying Diane's face. Can I tell you something about why Elena and I broke up? Diane nodded, surprised by the change of direction. Elena's dad was, let's call him controlling, emotionally abusive, financially manipulative, classic narcissist stuff. Elena knew it was toxic, but she couldn't bring herself to cut contact because her younger siblings still lived at home. She was convinced that if she maintained the relationship with her dad, she could protect them somehow. Jamie paused to sip her coffee, her eyes distant. But you know what actually happened? Her dad used Elena's loyalty against her. He'd threatened to kick the younger kids out if Elena didn't comply with his demands. He'd withhold money for their school supplies if she missed a family dinner. The more she tried to protect them, the more power she gave him to hurt all of them. Diane felt her chest tighten. What happened? Elena finally realized that her silence wasn't protecting anyone. It was enabling him. When she finally spoke up, when she finally set boundaries, it gave her siblings permission to speak up too. Turns out, they'd all been suffering in silence, each thinking they were protecting the others. The parallel was uncomfortable, but Diane couldn't ignore it. My situation is different. Marcus isn't abusive to my mom or Tyler. They genuinely love him. How do you know? Have you asked Tyler how he really feels? Have you talked to your mom about what she's actually observed? Before Diane could respond, her phone buzzed with a text. The message was from Linda. Marcus picked up Tyler from school and took him to get ice cream. They should be home by 6. Can you pick up milk on your way home? Such a normal, mundane request. Such an ordinary family moment. The cognitive dissonance made Diane's head spin. He took my little brother for ice cream, she said, showing Jamie the text. That's not the behavior of a monster. Abusers aren't monsters 24/7. Jamie said gently. They're often charming, generous, beloved by almost everyone they know. That's part of what makes the abuse so confusing for victims. If they were horrible all the time, it would be easier to leave. Diane stared at her latte, watching the foam art slowly dissolve. I keep thinking about this TV show Tyler loves. It's about this family of superheroes, and there's this episode where the daughter has to choose between saving her family and saving the city. She chooses her family, and later you find out that choice led to millions of people dying. And I feel like either choice I make leads to someone getting hurt. If I stay silent, Marcus keeps hurting me, and maybe it escalates. If I speak up, I destroy my mom's marriage, Tyler loses his father figure, and our family falls apart. Jamie leaned back in her vintage velvet chair, studying Diane with the same intensity she brought to examining x-rays at the clinic.
What if there's a third option you haven't considered? Like what? What if telling the truth actually saves your family? What if your mom already knows something's wrong but doesn't know how to address it? What if Tyler has noticed things but doesn't feel safe speaking up? The suggestion felt both terrifying and oddly hopeful. You really think that's possible? I think secrets are poison. They eat away at families from the inside, even when everyone's pretending everything is fine. Jamie pulled out her phone. Can I show you something? She scrolled through her photos and landed on a screenshot of a text conversation. This is from Elena, 2 months after she finally confronted her dad. She's texting about her youngest sister, who was 16 at the time. Diane read the message. Sarah told me the other day that she'd been hoping for years that someone would finally say what we were all thinking. She said Dad's behavior was scary, but she thought it was normal because nobody ever called it what it was. She's been seeing the school counselor and finally feels like she can breathe. Her sister was relieved. More than that, she felt validated. For years, she'd been questioning her own perceptions, wondering if she was crazy for being uncomfortable with their dad's behavior. When Elena finally named it as abuse, it gave Sarah permission to trust her own instincts. Diane thought about Tyler's reaction when he'd seen her bruises, the concern in his 12-year-old eyes, the way he'd asked what happened without any of the dismissive skepticism their mother had shown. There's something else, Diane said slowly. Something I haven't told you. Jamie waited. Last week I came home and found Tyler crying in his room. When I asked what was wrong, he said Marcus had yelled at him for leaving his bike in the driveway. But Tyler's always careful about putting his bike away. It didn't make sense. Did you ask Tyler more about it? I tried, but he clammed up. Said he was fine, just being sensitive. Diane paused. The next day, Marcus made a big show of taking Tyler to buy a new video game. Tyler seemed happy enough, so I figured it was resolved. Classic pattern. Abuse followed by love bombing makes the victim confused about what's real. The phrase love bombing was new to Diane, but the behavior it described was startlingly familiar. How many times had Marcus followed his playful grabbing with genuine compliments or small gifts? How many times had he explained away his actions with charm and humor? Jamie, what if I'm wrong about everything? What if my family really would be better off if I just learned to deal with this differently? Wrong how? Wrong about Marcus hurting you? Because those bruises on your arms suggest otherwise. Wrong about your instincts because your gut is telling you something's not right for a reason. Diane's phone buzzed again. This time it was a missed call from Rebecca Martinez, followed immediately by a voicemail notification. The lawyer's calling you back? I emailed her yesterday saying I'd changed my mind about pursuing charges. She wanted to discuss alternatives. Alternatives like what? I don't know. I haven't listened to the message yet. Jamie reached across the table and covered Diane's hand with hers. What are you afraid will happen if you listen to it? The question cut straight to the heart of Diane's paralysis. I'm afraid she'll convince me to do something I can't take back.
I'm afraid of being responsible for breaking up the only stable home Tyler has ever known. I'm afraid my mom will hate me for destroying her marriage. And what are you afraid will happen if you don't listen to it? Diane closed her eyes and immediately saw Marcus's face from that morning in the laundry room. The cold calculation in his eyes. The way he'd gripped her wrist just hard enough to hurt without leaving obvious marks. Then you already know what you need to do. Diane pulled up her voicemail and pressed play, putting the phone on speaker so Jamie could hear. Rebecca Martinez's professional voice filled the small space between them. "Hi, Diane. I got your email about wanting to withdraw from pursuing charges. I understand this is an overwhelming situation, but I want you to know there are steps we can take that don't require criminal prosecution. I've been consulting with a colleague who specializes in family mediation and safety planning. There might be ways to address the situation that protect both you and your family relationships. Please call me back when you're ready to discuss options. And Diane, please stay safe. Document everything. You're not alone in this." The message ended, leaving Diane staring at her phone. "She said there are other options," Jamie pointed out. "Ways to address it without destroying your family." "But what if those options don't work? What if Marcus just gets better at hiding his behavior? Then you'll know you tried, and you'll have documentation and professional support if things escalate." Jamie finished her coffee and leaned forward. "Look, I can't make this decision for you, but I can tell you that staying silent out of fear rarely makes the situation better. It just gives the abuser more time to refine their tactics." Diane looked around the coffee shop, at all the people living their complicated lives, making difficult choices, moving forward despite uncertainty. For the first time in weeks, she felt like maybe she wasn't completely alone in this. "Will you come with me?" she asked suddenly. "To call her back? Right now?" "Right now, before I lose my nerve again." Jamie grinned. "Let's do it, but not here, too public. My apartment's 10 minutes away. Elena left some legal textbooks behind when she moved out. Maybe we can do some research before you call." As they gathered their things and headed toward Jamie's beat-up Honda, Diane felt something shift inside her chest. Not confidence, exactly, but something close to it. For the first time since the morning in the laundry room, she was taking action instead of simply reacting. It wasn't a choice that she'd planned to make, but as they drove through the desert afternoon toward Jamie's apartment, Diane realized that maybe the choice between saving her family and saving herself was always a false dilemma. Maybe the real choice was between remaining paralyzed by fear and taking the first uncertain steps towards something better. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the city, and for the first time in weeks, those shadows didn't feel ominous. They felt like the promise of change.
Jamie's apartment was a converted loft in an old warehouse building with exposed ductwork painted bright turquoise and windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. Vintage band posters shared wall space with botanical prints, and a massive bookshelf dominated one corner, overflowing with veterinary texts, graphic novels, and what appeared to be an impressive collection of legal reference books. Elena was pre-law before she switched to social work, Jamie explained, gesturing toward the legal texts. She left most of her books behind when she moved to Portland. Said she needed a fresh start without reminders of her old life. Diane ran her fingers along the spines of the books. Constitutional law, family court procedures, domestic violence, legal remedies and social solutions. She was studying to be a lawyer? Yeah, until she realized she wanted to help people heal rather than just fight their battles in court. She's doing her MSW now at Portland State. Jamie pulled 2 books from the shelf, but she taught me enough legal basics to be dangerous. Want some wire while we research? This conversation requires alcohol. 20 minutes later, they were settled on Jamie's couch with glasses of red wine and a stack of reference materials spread across the coffee table. Diane had called Rebecca Martinez and left a message requesting a phone consultation for the following day. Now they were trying to understand what that conversation might entail. "Look at this," Jamie said, pointing to a highlighted passage in one of Elena's textbooks. Safety planning isn't just about leaving an abusive situation, it's about documenting patterns, creating support networks, and establishing legal protections before situations escalate. Diane leaned over to read the passage. The language was dense with legal terminology, but the concepts were surprisingly practical. It says here that many domestic violence cases fall apart because victims don't have sufficient documentation. What kind of documentation? Photographs, dated records of incidents, witness statements, medical records if applicable. Jamie flipped to another page. Oh, and this is interesting. Character witness statements from people who've observed changes in the victim's behavior or demeanor. Changes like what? Increased anxiety, social withdrawal, unexplained injuries, changes in work performance. Jamie looked up from the book. Has anyone at work noticed anything different about you lately? Diane thought about Dr. Patterson's concerned questions when she'd called in sick, about the way Sarah, the clinic's receptionist, had commented on how jumpy she'd been around male clients. Maybe. Dr. Patterson asked if everything was okay at home last week, and Sarah mentioned that I seem more nervous lately. That could be helpful. The book says that establishing a pattern of observable behavioral changes can strengthen a case even when the abuse itself happens in private. They spent the next hour taking notes, with Jamie translating legal jargon into plain English, and Diane slowly understanding that there were tools and strategies she'd never considered. The wine helped ease the knot of anxiety in her chest, and for the first time in weeks, she felt like she was learning skills rather than simply enduring circumstances. There's something else we should discuss, Jamie said, refilling their glasses. The book talks about something called family systems analysis, basically looking at how abuse affects the entire family dynamic, not just the direct victim. What do you mean? Think about it. Marcus's behavior toward you doesn't exist in a vacuum. It affects how your mom relates to you, how Tyler sees family dynamics, how everyone in the house navigates around his moods and preferences. Jamie turned to a new page. Sometimes other family members develop coping mechanisms that enable the abuse without realizing it. The observation hit uncomfortably close to home. Diane thought about how carefully everyone in their house managed Marcus's emotional temperature. Linda preparing his favorite meals when he'd had a bad day at work, Tyler automatically lowering the volume on his video games when Marcus came home, Diane herself learning to predict his moods and adjust her behavior accordingly. "Oh, God," Diane whispered. "I think he's been isolating her too." Emotional abuse often targets multiple family members differently. Direct physical intimidation for you, gradual control and diminishment for your mom, and Tyler. Jamie paused. Has Tyler's behavior changed since Marcus entered the picture? Diane tried to remember Tyler before Marcus, when he was just 3 years old and Linda was still struggling as a single mother. Tyler was curious, energetic, always asking questions and exploring. Now, at 12, he was still sweet but more cautious, quicker to apologize, less likely to express strong opinions about anything. He's become more careful, more worried about doing things wrong. That's common in households with domestic violence, even when the child isn't directly targeted. Kids learn to hypervigilant about adult moods and reactions. Diane felt a surge of anger more intense than anything she'd experienced since this ordeal began. It was one thing for Marcus to hurt her. She was an adult who could eventually leave, find her own place, build an independent life. But Tyler was just a child, learning what normal family relationships looked like. What if Marcus's behavior was teaching him that controlling others through fear was acceptable? "I need to talk to Tyler," Diane said suddenly. "That's complicated. Kids in these situations often feel torn between protecting the abuser and protecting other family members. You'd need to be really careful about how you approach it." Jamie flipped through several more pages, landing on a section titled Interviewing Child Witnesses in Domestic Violence Cases.
According to this, there are specific techniques for talking to children about abuse in the home. Open-ended questions, creating safe spaces for disclosure, avoiding leading questions that might influence their responses.
They spent another 30 minutes studying the guidelines, with Diane taking notes on her phone. The process felt simultaneously empowering and overwhelming, finally having tools and knowledge, but realizing how complex the situation truly was. "There's one more thing," Jamie said, closing the book. "Something I've been thinking about since our conversation at the coffee shop." "What?" "You keep talking about not wanting to break up your family, but what if your family is already broken? What if Marcus's behavior has already fractured the relationships between you and your mom, between you and Tyler? What if speaking up is actually the first step toward healing those fractures?" Diane considered this, thinking about how distant she'd felt from Linda lately, how careful she'd become around Tyler, afraid her anxiety might somehow contaminate his innocence. "I used to tell my mom everything. When I was in high school, we'd stay up late talking about boys and college plans and her real estate clients. Now I feel like I'm constantly editing myself around her, hiding how I really feel about everything." "Because you're protecting Marcus's image?" "I guess so. I didn't realize I was doing it, but yeah. God, Jamie, what if I've already lost my relationship with my mom and I don't even know how to get it back?" Maybe that's what we figure out next. Maybe part of your safety planning includes finding ways to reconnect with your mom that don't depend on pretending Marcus is someone he's not. Diane's phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "Where are you, honey? Marcus made his famous chili and was hoping you'd join us for dinner." The casual mention of Marcus's famous chili, as if he were just a loving stepfather eager to share a meal with his family, felt surreal given the conversation she had been having. "I should go home," Diane said, showing Jamie the text. "Are you sure? You could stay here tonight. My couch is actually pretty comfortable." The offer was tempting, but Diane knew that avoiding home would only create more questions and potentially escalate tensions. "I need to go back. But Jamie, thank you for the research, for listening, for helping me understand that I'm not crazy." "You're not crazy, and you're not alone." Jamie walked her to the door. "Call me tomorrow after you talk to Rebecca Martinez, okay? And if anything feels off tonight, anything at all, you leave immediately and come here." The drive home felt different than it had that morning. Diane still felt nervous about facing Marcus, but now that nervousness was tempered with something new: knowledge. She understood his patterns better, recognized the tactic she'd been unconsciously responding to for months. When she walked into the house, the smell of chili and cornbread filled the air. Linda was setting the table while Tyler helped Marcus grate cheese for toppings. It was such a picture of domestic harmony that for a moment Diane wondered if she'd imagined everything. "There's our career woman," Marcus said with a smile. "Your mom tells me you've been researching advancement opportunities." "Something like that," Diane replied, hanging her purse on the hook by the door. "Good for you. Initiative is important in any field." Marcus ladled chili into bowls, his movements relaxed and confident. "Of course, you want to make sure you're getting advice from the right people. Lots of so-called experts out there who don't have your best interests at heart." The comment could have been innocent, a stepfather offering career guidance. But given the context of the past week, Diane heard the underlying message: be careful who you trust. During dinner, Marcus regaled them with stories about his construction crew, making everyone laugh with his impressions of difficult clients. Tyler hung on every word, asking questions about building techniques and construction equipment. Linda smiled at her husband with genuine affection, occasionally reaching over to squeeze his hand. Watching them, Diane felt the familiar wave of doubt. How could this charming, funny man who clearly loved her mother and brother be the same person who'd cornered her in the laundry room? How could both versions of Marcus be real? But then she remembered Jamie's words about abusers not being monsters 24/7. She thought about the legal texts they had studied, the patterns of behavior they'd identified. She looked more closely at the family dynamics playing out around the dinner table. Linda checking Marcus's expression before sharing a story about her real estate success.
Tyler automatically clearing dishes without being asked, as if he'd learned that anticipating Marcus's preferences was safer than waiting to be told. The way everyone seemed to orbit around Marcus's mood and energy, adjusting their own behavior to maintain harmony. For the first time, Diane saw her family not as a collection of individuals choosing to be kind to each other, but as a system organized around managing one person's emotional needs and potential reactions. It was a revelation that changed everything. That night, as she lay in bed preparing for her phone call with Rebecca Martinez the next day, Diane realized that her choice wasn't between protecting her family and destroying it. Her choice was between enabling a system that was slowly poisoning all of them or taking the first steps toward building something healthier. The phone call tomorrow would be the beginning of learning how to choose healing over harmony, truth over peace, and authentic relationships over comfortable lies. For the first time in months, Diane fell asleep feeling hopeful about the future, even though she had no idea what that future would look like.
Rebecca Martinez's voice carried a warmth that made the phone consultation feel more like talking to a trusted mentor than a legal advisor. Diane sat in her Honda Civic in the Desert Paws parking lot during her lunch break, having chosen the familiar space for its sense of safety and privacy. "I'm glad you called back, Diane. I've been thinking about your situation since our meeting, and I believe we have several viable options that don't require immediate criminal prosecution." "What kind of options?" Diane asked, pulling out the notebook where she'd written down questions during her research session with Jamie. "First, we could pursue what's called a civil protection order. It's less formal than criminal charges, but still creates legal consequences if Marcus violates the terms. Second, we could work with a family mediator who specializes in domestic violence situations, someone trained to facilitate conversations that prioritize safety. Third, we could develop a comprehensive safety plan that includes documentation protocols and intervention strategies. Each option felt like a lifeline Diane hadn't known existed. Would any of these require my mother to know immediately? That depends on which path you choose and how you want to proceed. But Diane, I need to ask you something important. Has Marcus's behavior escalated since our last conversation? Diane thought about the previous evening's dinner, about Marcus's seemingly casual comment about getting advice from the right people. Not physically, but he made a comment that suggested he knows I've been seeking outside help. There was a pause on the other end of the line. That's concerning. When abusers become aware that their victims are seeking support, it often triggers an escalation. We need to move quickly to establish protections. What does that mean, exactly? It means we stop planning and start implementing. Are you free this afternoon for an emergency consultation? I'd like to bring in Dr. Sarah Chen, a forensic psychologist who works with our firm. She can help us assess the risk level and develop immediate safety strategies. The word emergency sent a chill through Diane's body. You think I'm in immediate danger? I think the situation has shifted from potentially dangerous to actively concerning. Marcus's awareness of your help-seeking behavior changes the dynamic significantly. An hour later, Diane found herself back in Rebecca's office, this time accompanied by Dr. Chen, a petite woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of calm presence that immediately put Diane at ease. "I want to start by validating something important," Dr. Chen said, settling into the chair beside Rebecca's desk. "Your instincts about this situation have been accurate from the beginning. Everything you've described follows classic patterns of intimate partner violence that extend to family members. But he's not my intimate partner. The power dynamics are similar. Marcus has been using physical intimidation, emotional manipulation, and systematic control to establish dominance over you within your family system. The fact that he's your stepmother makes it more complex legally and emotionally, but it doesn't make it less serious." Dr. Chen opened a tablet and began asking questions that felt different from anything Diane had experienced before. Instead of asking what Marcus had done, she asked about patterns. escalation timelines, and family dynamics going back years. Tell me about how conflict gets resolved in your household, Dr. Chen said. Usually my mom tries to smooth things over. If Marcus is upset about something, she'll make his favorite dinner or suggest an activity he enjoys. Tyler and I have learned to just avoid doing things that might set him off. And when that doesn't work, Diane thought about the few times she'd witnessed Marcus truly angry, slamming doors, raising his voice, storming out of the house, only to return hours later with flowers for Linda. He has outbursts, but then he makes up for them. Grand gestures, gifts, being extra charming for a few days. Dr. Chen and Rebecca exchanged a look that made Diane's stomach tighten. What is it? The pattern you're describing suggests that Marcus has been conditioning your entire family to manage his emotional state. This isn't just isolated incidents of physical intimidation toward you. It's systematic psychological manipulation of everyone in the household. Rebecca leaned forward, which means our approach needs to be more comprehensive than I initially thought. We're not just protecting you from physical assault. We're dismantling a control system that's affecting your entire family. But what if my mom doesn't want the system dismantled? What if she's happy with how things are? Dr. Chen opened to a new page on her tablet. Can you tell me about your mother's behavior before she married Marcus? What was she like as a person? The question unlocked memories Diane hadn't accessed in years. Linda before Marcus was vibrant, opinionated, sometimes impulsive. She'd blast music while cleaning on Saturday mornings, stay up too late reading romance novels, and frequently rearrange furniture on whims. She had strong friendships with other single mothers and had been fiercely protective of Diane during the difficult years after her divorce. She was bigger somehow, more herself.
Now she's careful, considerate. She thinks about how Marcus will react to things before she does them. The realization hit Diane like cold water. Oh my God, he's been controlling her too. Emotional and psychological abuse often looks like partnership to outside observers, Dr. Chen said gently. The victim learns to anticipate and manage the abuser's needs so effectively that the control becomes invisible. Rebecca pulled out a legal pad and began sketching what looked like a timeline. Here's what I'm thinking for our immediate strategy. We document everything from this point forward. Every incident, every comment, every time someone in your family adjusts their behavior to manage Marcus's moods. We build a comprehensive picture of the control system. How long would that take? Ideally, several weeks. But given that Marcus seems aware of your help seeking, we may not have that luxury. Rebecca looked up from her notes. There's something else we need to discuss. Are you prepared for the possibility that taking action might force a crisis? What kind of crisis? Dr. Chen answered. When control systems are challenged, they often escalate before they collapse. Marcus might become more aggressive, more manipulative, or he might try to turn your family against you. The prospect was terrifying, but Diane found herself thinking about Tyler's careful behavior, about Linda's gradual diminishment, about her own growing fear in what was supposed to be her safe space. What happens if I don't take action? The control typically increases over time, Dr. Chen said. What feels manageable now becomes less manageable. The incidents that seem isolated become more frequent, and other family members often develop trauma responses even when they're not directly targeted. Rebecca set down her pen. Diane, I need you to understand something. This decision, whatever you choose, is entirely yours. We can provide tools, support, and legal protections, but you're the one who has to live with the consequences. But you think I should move forward? I think you deserve to live without fear in your own home. I think your brother deserves to grow up understanding what healthy family relationships look like. And I think your mother deserves the chance to remember who she was before she learned to make herself small. Dr. Chen nodded.
The research is clear on this. Families affected by domestic violence almost always report feeling relieved after successful intervention, even when the process is difficult. Diane stared out the window at downtown Phoenix, at the people walking purposefully along the sidewalks, living their complicated but seemingly normal lives. How many of them had faced moments like this? Choices that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of their families. If I decide to move forward, what would happen first? Rebecca pulled out a folder she'd prepared. We start with documentation. You go home tonight with a plan for recording incidents, photographing any physical evidence, and keeping a detailed log of family dynamics. Within a week, we file for a preliminary protection order. And then? Then we see how Marcus responds. If he complies with the order and perhaps agrees to counseling, we might be able to work toward family healing. If he violates it or escalates his behavior, we have grounds for more serious legal action. Dr. Chin added, either way, we'll be providing resources for your mother and Tyler, family counseling, individual therapy if needed, support groups for family members affected by domestic violence. The plan felt both overwhelming and oddly reassuring. For the first time since this ordeal began, Diane could envision a path forward that didn't end with either accepting abuse or destroying her family. Rebecca said, there's one more thing. Once we file that protection order, there's no going back to the way things were. Even if Marcus never violates it, even if your family stays together, everyone will know that his behavior crossed legal boundaries. That knowledge changes family dynamics permanently. Changes them how? It removes the option of pretending the problem doesn't exist. It forces everyone to acknowledge what's been happening and make conscious choices about how to move forward. Diane thought about the research she'd done with Jamie, about family systems organized around one person's emotional needs, about the careful dance everyone in her household performed to maintain Marcus's approval. Maybe it was time to stop dancing. I want to move forward, she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. Not because I want to hurt anyone, but because I want my family to have the chance to be healthy. Rebecca smiled, the first genuinely happy expression Diane had seen from her. Then let's get started. Dr. Chin will walk you through the documentation protocols, and I'll begin preparing the preliminary paperwork for the protection order. As Dr. Chin explained how to safely photograph evidence and maintain incident logs, Diane felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope mixed with determination. It wasn't the passive hope that things would somehow get better on their own, but the active hope that comes from taking control of your own story. That evening, driving home with a folder full of safety planning materials hidden in her trunk, Diane realized that she'd crossed an invisible line. She was no longer a victim trying to manage an impossible situation. She was someone fighting for her family's right to live without fear. The fight would be difficult, and there would be casualties along the way, but for the first time since Marcus had cornered her in the laundry room, Diane felt like she had weapons other than silence and endurance. She had knowledge, allies, legal protections, and most importantly, the growing conviction that her family deserved better than the careful, fearful peace they'd been calling happiness. The point of no return was behind her now. Whatever came next, at least it would be honest.
The process server arrived at Desert Paws Animal Hospital on a Tuesday morning that had started like any other. Diane was assisting Dr. Patterson with a routine space surgery when Sarah knocked on the operating room door. "Diane, there's someone here to see you. Says it's official business." Dr. Patterson looked up from the anesthetized golden retriever on the table. "Can it wait 30 minutes?" "He says it can't. Something about court documents." Diane's heart stopped. She and Rebecca had agreed that the protection order would be served at Marcus's construction site, not at her workplace. Something had gone wrong. The process server was a middle-aged man in a rumpled suit who looked apologetic about interrupting her workday. "Diana Craft?" "Diane," she corrected automatically. "I have a court order here that requires your signature." He handed her a manila envelope. "You're being served as a witness in a domestic violence case." Diane's hands shook as she opened the envelope. Inside was a subpoena requiring her to testify in family court regarding incidents of domestic violence witnessed in the home of Marcus and Linda Webb. At the bottom, in Rebecca's familiar handwriting, was a note, "Emergency filing necessary. Marcus discovered our investigation. Call immediately."
I don't understand, Diane said to the process server. I thought I was the one filing for protection. Ma'am, I just deliver the papers. You'll need to contact the attorney listed for any questions. After he left, Diane sat in the staff break room staring at the subpoena. The legal language was dense, but one phrase jumped out at her. The state of Arizona versus Marcus Webb. This wasn't the civil protection order they'd planned. This was a criminal case. Her phone rang before she could process what that meant. Diane, thank God. Rebecca's voice was tense. Are you somewhere safe? I'm at work. What happened? Why is this a criminal case? Marcus hired a private investigator to follow you. The PI photographed you entering my office building, documented your meetings with Dr. Chen, and apparently surveilled Jamie's apartment. When Marcus confronted Linda with evidence that you were making up stories to lawyers, she broke down and disclosed years of his controlling behavior. The world seemed to tilt sideways. My mom knows? She knows everything. And Diane, there's more. Linda called the police herself yesterday. She's been documenting Marcus's psychological abuse for months, keeping a journal hidden in her real estate office. She was too afraid to act alone, but when she realized you were trying to protect the family by staying silent, she decided she couldn't let you sacrifice yourself for her marriage. Diane felt tears burning her eyes. Where is she now? She and Tyler are staying at a domestic violence shelter. Linda gave a statement to police detectives yesterday evening. Between her journal, your documented injuries, and testimony from Tyler about Marcus's intimidation tactics, the district attorney decided to file criminal charges. Tyler gave a statement? With a child advocate present. Apparently, he's been afraid of Marcus for years, but didn't know it was okay to say so. When Linda explained that keeping secrets was hurting the family, Tyler disclosed several incidents we hadn't known about. The break room door opened and Dr. Patterson stuck his head in. Everything okay? You look pale. Family emergency. Can I take the rest of the day? Of course. Take tomorrow too if you need it. Diane drove toward the shelter address Rebecca had given her, her mind reeling with questions and emotions she couldn't name. The last week of careful documentation and safety planning now felt like elaborate theater. While she had been agonizing over whether to take action, her mother had already been building a case for their protection. The New Horizons Women's Shelter was nothing like what Diane had imagined. Instead of a grim institutional building, it was a converted apartment complex surrounded by desert landscaping and children's play equipment. A security gate required check-in with staff, but the atmosphere felt more like a supportive community than a place people fled to in crisis. Linda was sitting in a common room that looked like someone's living room, if someone's living room had been designed by committee to be aggressively comforting. Tyler was beside her on the couch, playing a handheld video game with the focused intensity of a child trying not to think about adult problems. Mom? Diane's voice cracked. Linda looked up, and Diane saw her mother clearly for the first time in years. Without the careful makeup and styled hair she'd maintained for Marcus's approval, Linda looked younger, but also more tired, as if she had been holding her breath for a decade and was finally allowing herself to exhale. Oh, sweetheart, Linda stood and wrapped Diane in a hug that felt different from any embrace they'd shared since Marcus entered their lives. It was fierce, protective, and completely present. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't believe you. I'm so sorry I let this go on so long. I'm so sorry you felt like you had to handle this alone. Tyler looked up from his game. Are you okay, Diane? Mom said Marcus was hurting you and that's why we had to leave.
Diane sat down beside her little brother, studying his face. He looked relieved rather than traumatized, as if a weight he'd been carrying had finally been lifted. I'm okay. Are you okay? Yeah, the counselor lady here is really nice. She said it's not normal for kids to be scared of their stepdads. I thought everyone felt like that. Tyler paused his game. She also said it's not my fault that Marcus got mad about my bike and my homework and stuff. It's definitely not your fault, Diane said, her heart breaking for all the ways Tyler had been learning to blame himself for an adult's inability to manage his own emotions. Linda sat back down, reaching for both of her children's hands. There's something I need to tell you both. Something I should have told you years ago. Over the next hour, Linda revealed the Marcus that Diane had glimpsed, but never fully understood.
The gradual isolation from her friends and family, the financial control that had made her feel trapped in the marriage, the way he'd systematically undermined her confidence in her own perceptions and decision-making abilities. "I kept a journal for the past 2 years," Linda said, pulling a small notebook from her purse. "Every time he made me feel crazy for having normal human reactions, every time he convinced me that his anger was justified by something I'd done wrong, every time I caught myself changing my behavior to avoid setting him off." "Why didn't you leave sooner?" Diane asked gently. "Because I thought I was protecting you and Tyler. I thought if I could just manage him better, keep him happy, then you two would be safe." Linda's voice broke. "I didn't realize until yesterday that my silence was teaching both of you that his behavior was normal, that it was your job to manage his emotions too." Tyler looked confused. "But Marcus was nice sometimes. He taught me how to throw a football and took us on vacations." "Abusive people aren't monsters all the time," Linda explained, echoing something Dr. Chen had told Diane. "That's what makes it so confusing. The good times feel real because they are real, but they don't cancel out the times when someone makes you feel afraid or unsafe." A shelter counselor named Maria joined them, explaining what would happen next. Marcus had been arrested that morning at his construction site. The criminal case would proceed whether or not they participated, but their testimony would be crucial for establishing patterns of behavior. "What about our house? What about my stuff?" Tyler asked. "We'll arrange for you to get your belongings, but you won't be going back to live there, not while Marcus is out on bail." The reality of their situation was starting to sink in. They were homeless, essentially. Everything they'd built as a family was gone. Diane felt a wave of guilt so intense it made her nauseous. "This is my fault," she said. "If I hadn't gone to the lawyer, if I just found a way to deal with it differently—" "Stop!" Linda's voice was sharp. "This is Marcus's fault. His choices, his behavior, his consequences. You going to that lawyer was the bravest thing you could have done, and it gave me permission to be brave too." But bravery, Diane was learning, didn't make the aftermath any easier. That evening, lying on a narrow bed in a shared room at the shelter, Diane stared at the ceiling and tried to process the wreckage of their lives. Tyler was sleeping fitfully in the next bed, occasionally mumbling in his sleep. Linda was in the adult wing, probably lying awake asking herself the same questions that were tormenting Diane. What if Marcus's lawyer convinced a jury that they were lying? What if the judge decided the evidence wasn't sufficient? What if Marcus was acquitted and came after them for destroying his reputation and career? Worse, what if they won? What if Marcus was convicted and sent to prison? Tyler would grow up knowing that his stepfather is in jail because of testimony from his family. Linda would have to rebuild her life from scratch at 42, starting over financially and emotionally. Either way, their family, as Tyler had known it, was gone forever. The house on Saguaro Lane, the stability Marcus had provided, the illusion of normalcy they'd all worked so hard to maintain, all of it was collateral damage in her decision to stop accepting abuse. Diane pulled out her phone and scrolled through text messages from Jamie, from Dr. Patterson, from Rebecca Martinez. Everyone was proud of her courage, supportive of her decision, confident that she'd done the right thing. But lying in a shelter bed surrounded by other women who'd made similar choices, Diane wondered if doing the right thing always had to hurt so much. If protecting yourself and your family always required destroying the life you'd known before. Outside the shelter's reinforced windows, Phoenix glittered in the desert night. Millions of people sleeping peacefully in homes they felt safe in. Just a week ago, Diane was one of them, unhappy but secure, afraid but protected by familiar routines and predictable dangers. Now, she was adrift in a system designed to help people like her, but feeling more lost than she'd ever been in her life. The crisis she'd tried to avoid had arrived anyway, bringing with it consequences she'd never imagined and choices she wasn't sure she was strong enough to make. The abyss wasn't Marcus's violence or her family's dysfunction. The abyss was this moment, having done everything right according to everyone else's standards, and still feeling like she'd made a terrible mistake that could never be undone. Tomorrow she would have to be strong for Tyler, supportive for Linda, and confident for the lawyers and counselors and court officials who needed her to be a credible witness in a case that would determine their future. Tonight, she allowed herself to grieve for the family they'd been, flawed and frightened, but together, and to wonder if the family they might become would be worth the price they were all paying to get there.
6 months later, Diane stood in the kitchen of their new apartment in Tempe, watching Tyler help Linda assemble a bookshelf they'd bought from IKEA. The morning light streaming through windows that didn't require security bars felt like a small miracle. "Mom, this piece doesn't fit where the instructions say it should," Tyler said, holding up a wooden panel with the focused determination of a 13-year-old who'd recently discovered he enjoyed solving problems. "Let me see." Linda examined the diagram, her reading glasses perched on her nose, a small vanity she'd abandoned during her marriage to Marcus, but reclaimed during their months at the shelter. "I think we're supposed to flip it around. Try the other direction." Diane smiled as she poured coffee into mugs that actually matched, a luxury they'd slowly accumulated as they rebuilt their household from nothing. The apartment was small, a 2-bedroom place near Arizona State University that Linda could afford on her real estate commission and Diane's promotion to veterinary technician supervisor. It wasn't the house on Saguaro Lane, but it was theirs. The criminal trial had ended 3 weeks ago, with Marcus accepting a plea agreement. 18 months in county jail, 3 years probation, mandatory anger management counseling, and a permanent restraining order. He had avoided a felony conviction, but the misdemeanor assault and stalking charges meant he'd lost his contractor's license and most of his client base. Diane had expected to feel vindicated by the outcome. Instead, she'd felt something more complex. Relief, mixed with sadness, for the family they might have been if Marcus had chosen accountability over control. "Diane, can you hand me that Allen wrench?" Linda asked, wrestling with a particularly stubborn joint. As Diane passed the tool to her mother, she marveled at how different Linda seemed. Not just happier, but more solid somehow. The woman who'd spent years second-guessing her own perceptions had rediscovered her competence and judgment. She'd joined a support group for survivors of emotional abuse, started taking yoga classes, and had even begun dating a gentle widower she'd met through her real estate office. "You know what I realized yesterday?" Linda said, successfully connecting the joint. "I used to say sorry constantly. Sorry for having opinions, sorry for taking up space, sorry for having normal human needs. It was a habit I developed to avoid conflict with Marcus. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that excessive apologizing was one way I'd learned to manage his moods." Dr. Elena Martinez wasn't related to Rebecca, but she was the family therapist who'd been working with them since they left the shelter. Weekly sessions had helped them understand not just Marcus's behavior, but their own patterns of response that had developed over years of psychological manipulation. Tyler, who had initially been resistant to therapy, had become one of Dr. Martinez's most engaged clients. "She says it's normal that I still miss Marcus sometimes, even though he scared me. Like, I can miss the good parts without wanting the bad parts back." "That's very wise," Diane said, and meant it. Tyler's emotional intelligence continued to surprise her. Free from the hypervigilance that had characterized his childhood, he'd blossomed into a confident teenager who spoke his mind, asked what he needed, and didn't automatically blame himself when other people were upset. The bookshelf project was interrupted by Diane's phone ringing. Jamie's name appeared on the screen. "How's the furniture assembly going?" Jamie asked without preamble.
Slowly, but successfully. Are you still coming for dinner tonight? Wouldn't miss it. Elena's flying in from Portland, and she's dying to meet the family that inspired my crash course in domestic violence advocacy. Jamie had become more than just a supportive friend during the crisis. She'd testified as a character witness during Marcus's trial, documenting the changes she'd observed in Diane's behavior and demeanor. More importantly, she'd helped Diane maintain her sense of humor and perspective during the months when everything felt overwhelming. How's the new job? Incredible. I never thought I'd enjoy legal advocacy, but turns out I'm good at helping other women navigate the system. Who knew? Jamie had left the veterinary clinic to work for a nonprofit organization that provided legal support for domestic violence survivors. Speaking of which, I have news. Good news or complicated news? Both. Remember Sarah Williams, the woman whose case I helped with last month? Her ex-husband was sentenced yesterday. 5 years, no possibility of early release. That's wonderful, though I knew from experience that legal victories often come with emotional complications. It is, and she wanted me to thank you specifically. Me? I've never met her. But she read the victim impact statement you wrote for Marcus's sentencing hearing. She said it helped her understand that speaking up wasn't betraying her family, it was protecting them. I remember writing that statement, how difficult it had been to articulate the complex mix of love, fear, and determination that had driven me to seek help. I never considered that my words might reach beyond the courtroom. Diane, can I ask you something? Always. Do you think we did the right thing? Sometimes I look at Tyler building furniture and making friends and getting good grades, and I think, yes, absolutely. But other times, I think about the fact that he doesn't have a father figure anymore, that he had to change schools, and that we're all starting over financially, and I wonder if there was a better way. Jamie was quiet for a moment. Can I tell you what Elena said when I asked her the same question about her family? What? She said the alternative was teaching her siblings that love and fear are the same thing. That teaching them to accept unacceptable behavior in the name of family loyalty was actually the most damaging thing she could have done.
Diane thought about Tyler's easy laughter over the past few months, about Linda's growing confidence, about her own ability to sleep through the night without listening for footsteps in the hallway. Elena's smart. She is, and so are you. See you tonight. After hanging up, Diane returned to the living room where Linda and Tyler had successfully completed the bookshelf and were now debating where to position it. "What goes on the shelves?" Tyler asked. Linda smiled. "Our books. All the books I put in storage because Marcus said they made the house look cluttered." "You had books in storage?" "Boxes of them. Romance novels, biographies, cookbooks, gardening guides. I used to love reading, but I gradually stopped because Marcus would make dismissive comments about me wasting time with books instead of keeping the house perfect." Diane watched her mother's face as she talked about reclaiming this part of herself. It was a small thing, but it represented something larger. The right to have interests and pleasures that didn't require anyone else's approval. "What about you, Diane?" Tyler asked. "What are you going to put on the shelves?" "Veterinary journals, those legal textbooks Jamie lent me, maybe some of those mystery novels Dr. Patterson keeps recommending." She paused, considering. "And photo albums. I want to make new photo albums of our life here." It was a small declaration, but it felt significant. For years, their family photos had been carefully curated to present a happy image that Marcus would approve of. Now they could document their real lives. Tyler's soccer games, Linda's real estate victories, Diane's graduation from the veterinary technician program she'd completed while living at the shelter. That evening, their small apartment filled with laughter and conversation as Jamie and Elena joined them for dinner. Elena was exactly as Jamie had described her, warm, intelligent, and refreshingly direct about her own experiences with family trauma and healing. "The hardest part for me," Elena said over dessert, "was accepting that I couldn't save my siblings by staying silent. I had to trust that they were strong enough to handle the truth about our family dynamics." "Were they?" Linda asked. "More than I'd given them credit for.
My youngest sister told me later that my decision to speak up was the first time she'd felt permission to trust her own instincts about our dad's behavior. That's like what happened with us. When Diane went to the lawyer, it made Mom realize she didn't have to pretend Marcus was nice anymore. And when Mom called the police, it made me realize I didn't have to keep secrets about being scared, Diane added. Elena nodded. That's how healing often works in families. One person's courage gives everyone else permission to be honest. Later, after Jamie and Elena had left and Tyler had gone to bed, Diane and Linda sat on their small balcony overlooking the Tempe neighborhood. The desert air was cooling as evening approached, and the sounds of their new community, children playing, neighbors talking, dogs barking, created a soundtrack of ordinary life. "Do you regret anything?" Linda asked quietly. "About leaving Marcus?" "About any of it. The trial, the shelter, starting over, putting Tyler through all the upheaval?" Diane considered the question seriously. The past 6 months had been the most challenging of her life, but also the most authentic. She'd learned skills she'd never known she needed. How to navigate legal systems, how to rebuild credit, how to create safety without sacrificing honesty. "I regret that Marcus made choices that hurt all of us. I regret that Tyler had to grow up in a house where he learned to be afraid of an adult's moods. I regret that you spent years making yourself smaller to keep peace." "But you don't regret speaking up?" "No. Even on the hardest days, I don't regret that." Diane looked at her mother, this woman who'd found the courage to start over at 42. "Do you?" "I regret waiting so long. I regret that you had to be the brave one first." Linda reached over and squeezed Diane's hand. "But I'm proud of who we've become." They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the desert sky. Tomorrow, Diane would start her new position as head veterinary technician at a clinic specializing in rescue animals. Linda had listings for 3 houses she was confident would sell quickly. Tyler had tryouts for his new school soccer team. They were building something new, not just a household, but a family culture based on honesty instead of harmony, authenticity instead of approval-seeking, and love that didn't require anyone to diminish themselves to receive it. It wasn't the life any of them had planned, but it was the life they'd chosen when they chose truth over comfortable lies. And as Diane settled into bed that night in their small, safe apartment, she realized that choosing yourself, choosing honesty, choosing growth, choosing the courage to speak uncomfortable truths wasn't selfish after all. It was the most generous gift you could give to the people you loved. It was the foundation on which real families were built, and it was the beginning of everything that mattered. The end. In the months that followed, Diane would often think about that Tuesday morning in the laundry room when Marcus had first crossed the line from psychological control to physical intimidation. She'd been 23 then, afraid and isolated, convinced that protecting her family meant protecting their secrets. Now at 24, she understood that protecting her family meant telling their secrets to lawyers, to counselors, to each other, and ultimately to themselves. The bruises had healed, but the courage remained. And that, she realized, made all the difference.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.